Hello and welcome to League of Musings episode 3. I decided to do this episode live on Twitch because I've been having some issues with my video recording software. Pretty boring stuff, you guys don't want to hear about it. I apologize for the surprising lack of content lately. I believe my last article was 10 days ago about the coaching changes. It's been crazy busy for me lately between working retail and the holiday season and Thanksgiving and all of this good stuff. It's just been a busy couple weeks, so I haven't been able to record any episodes of League of Musings or write as much as I would want to. So I decided, hey, what the hell, I might as well try a live episode. Don't know if anyone's going to watch, don't really care, just going to try this out for the first time. As you can see, I sort of have a basic layout. Obviously, I'll do more work on this as time comes or time goes along. It's fresh start for me. I'm debating whether I want to continue doing this live or continue to just do pre-recorded versions. I guess it depends on if I can update my software so it is compatible with what I plan to do with it. Anyway, so as you can see on the right hand of your screen, I have the list of topics I plan on talking about today. And yeah, normally I would just run that down at the beginning of the episode, but since I could add it to the side, I figured I would make it a little easier. So, without further ado, let's just get right into it. Rekkles to Alliance. Praise heaven, this is finally been decided. I was getting probably as tired as everybody else was hearing about this move, the speculation surrounding this move, whether this move was actually going to happen or not. Everybody sort of knew this was in the works, and I'm just glad that it's over. I'm glad that it's official. I'm glad we know that what Alliance's lineup is going to be for IEM San Jose. I was just getting probably as tired as everybody else at the lack of official announcement. How he's going to fit into the team remains to be seen. It's probably going to take some time for him to build synergy, as the oft-used word is, with his new teammates. It'll be interesting. My favorite phrase to say. It'll be interesting to see how it ends up working out. I believe that Alliance should be one of the favorites at IEM San Jose. Even if they hadn't made a roster change, I still would have made that argument. I'm just glad that this is over. This reminds me, anyone who's a football fan out there will know about the epically long transfer sagas that have taken place with like the Premier League and La Liga. I mean, this reminded me of like the Fabregas to Barcelona transfer rumors that had been going on for well over a year when he was on Arsenal back in the day, and like last summer or 2 summers ago with Gareth Bale to Real Madrid. It's the same thing. It's just you want to know what's going to happen, and it's all the what-ifs that are very frustrating. And I'm just glad that this deal is done. He seems to have the right drive to be a successful player. I think that being in Korea probably showed him how teams that take... Now, I'm not saying that... Okay, I'm just going to table that because I'm actually planning on writing an article about Fnatic in the future, so I don't want to talk about any of that business. Anyway, glad it's over. I'm glad it's decided. I'm sure everyone else is glad that this nonsense has been put to rest. And it'll be... and now it just remains to be seen how well he fits into the team. So, next on our list of dandy topics, not actually dandy, but dandy is in the adjective, is Santorin to TSM. Another move that long gestating, long rumored. I'm personally not sure why this move took so long to announce. Possibly they had to get the approval process from Riot took longer than they were expecting, but I mean, he had been seen apparently by Reddit detectives at TSM's house weeks ago. I mean, I think this was, in terms of NA moves, this and CLG Zion Spartan were probably the worst kept secrets. Not really a surprise. I can't really talk about how he's going to fit into the team because I really have not seen Santorin play that much. I did not watch a lot of the Challenger series. this over the summer. Now I just didn't have the time to do it. It's difficult for me to imagine that he's going to be an upgrade on Amazing, just because Amazing has much more competitive experience at the highest level. Now, that's not to say that Santorin won't develop into a stronger player over time. I just think that at the outset, it may take him longer to get over, at the issues that face any new player that comes into the LCS. It's another one of those situations, just like Rekkles to Alliance, or I've talked about in past episodes with Zion Spartan to CLG. I'm just glad that it's official at this point. I'm glad that the rosters in all the different regions are starting to become solidified, and that we're starting to get a better idea of what we're going to be dealing with coming into the NA and EU LCS spring split. The uncertainty that we've sort of been facing in this offseason has made it difficult to predict or have any type of gauge on how these teams are going to perform. And now that the teams are starting to coalesce into wholes, it's going to be it's nice. It's good for the fans. It's good for journalists that actually can talk about it, and I'm sure it's good for the teams because they're going to have way more time now to practice together, to scrim together, and luckily for the teams that are competing in the IEM events, they'll have time to play LAN events together, which is crucial, as we've seen in the past. Let's see. I'm not really sure if I have anything else to say on Santorin to TSM. I think that everybody sort of saw this coming, as I said before, and I, like many of you, are just glad that it has been decided and that it is officially official. That was a lot of officials. All right. The next topic is Samsung, blue and white, and their complete dissolution as teams. Not as an organization, obviously, but their teams. Now, there's a tweet, I think a week or two ago, by Susie Kim that said that all of the players had left the organization. That didn't mean that they weren't planning on re-signing with them. It just meant that they hadn't signed yet. But as we saw over the last week or two, many of these players are gone. They're gone officially. Dandy, Mata, and Hart to VG Gaming, and Imp to LGD, all Chinese teams. Now, I wrote an article about this, about how disappointed I was personally, and how disappointed the community should be that a world championship winning roster in Samsung White, a team with seemingly limitless potential after their just dominant world championship run. I mean, I was like, immediately after they beat Royal Club, my biggest question was, what's next? What can they do in OGN next? So it's a shame that we'll never get to answer that question. We'll never get to see arguably the greatest, what could be, you could make a strong case for them being the greatest League of Legends team of all time. And it's a shame that their run ended abruptly. Excuse me. And I think that the bigger question is how can an organization like Samsung, with their financial clout, not have the ability? Oh, it's clearly not an ability issue. They have the ability to play these players, pay these players, not have the willingness to try and to pay these players what the market has determined their value is in order to keep them and field a winning roster. Now, maybe they believe for some reason that they could, easily replace them. It's obvious that Korea has a wealth of talent in the amateur scene and in their challenger ladder. They're this most skilled region on the planet. So, there's a case to be made that Samsung is taking a cheaper option. I think it's just disappointing considering who Samsung is as a company, and that a company like this could not or will not seemingly pay market value for their players. Now, this market value could be inflated, obviously, because there's a lot of money being thrown around in China. So maybe that isn't their market value, and maybe that's what they're falling back on. Maybe they just believe, like I said before, that they could find talent in Korea without having to spend the money that they have to pay, without having to spend the money that these Chinese teams are willing to pay them. I mean, I understand that rationale, I do, but the dandies and matas and imps, like they don't grow on trees. Dandy and mata especially, those two are transcendent players at their position, clearly the best in the world at their position. And personally, I feel like they deserve to be compensated at the level that the best in the world requires. And there's been a lot of talk about recently about where are the big many sponsors, where are the non gaming, the non peripheral gaming peripheral, non streaming, where are those sponsors? Where are like the AT&Ts and the Apples and all these different Fortune 500 companies like Samsung? Where are they? And when they come, will they bring money to the table? Now, I don't think it's a guarantee that they will, because clearly Samsung, a billion-dollar corporation, is not willing to pay the money to retain these players. So I don't necessarily believe, maybe over time, but not necessarily in the short term, that if these companies come in, they're going to automatically want to pay, uh, pay top dollar to field a really good team. So it's an interesting situation. Like I said, I wrote an article about it. There's a link to my blog or website, esportsmusings.com. Below the channel box, there should be a link down there. Go down there, check it out, see what I had to say. I articulated myself much better in that than I currently am. So, yeah, it's just, it's sad. It reminds me of the Florida Marlins after they won the 97 World Series. They blew up their roster and got rid of all of their good players. And again in 2003, when the Marlins won the World Series, they blew up their roster and got rid of all their good players because they didn't want to pay the market value for them. And that's basically what Samsung just did. And it's disappointing. It sucks for the fans, and it sucks because we will look back at this moment in the history of League of Legends and we will never know what else this team could have accomplished. They had reached the mountaintop with Worlds, but how dominant of a run could they have had if this team had decided to remain together, or if Samsung had spent the money to keep Samsung White as a roster? So we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see where the Samsung organization ends up next year in OGN, in the new OGN format. Who knows? Maybe they're growing a backyard full of dandies right now, and they're just gonna pluck one off a tree and throw them in the jungle. And I don't know. It'll be interesting. There's that phrase again, to see what their fortunes are. Because if they have a disappointing season, then to come from the height of winning Worlds, they have to do well next year. Otherwise, people are going to look at their team, the organization, and be like, why would you let all of this talent flee for very little amount of money? I think that's the thing that people are missing. It's like, yes, China is throwing around a lot of money to pay these players, but the amount of money that Samsung pays in shirt sponsorships and athletic sponsorships and team sponsorships is just dwarfs the amount that they would have had to have paid these players to field basically the same team. It's unbelievable. Just look at the numbers. Just look at how much they paid Chelsea for the past like 6 or 7 years to just have their name on their shirt. Like, and granted, the Premier League is the most popular league in the world. I get that, but it's pennies on the dollar what they would have to pay what they would have had to have paid the players of Samsung White or Samsung Blue, or just made a super team out of the two of them, uh, in order to keep them in Korea. All right. I'm only going to talk about the NA expansion tournament because I have not had the opportunity to watch the EU expansion tournament yet. Obviously, a lot of us haven't had the opportunity to watch it because they've had a lot of production difficulties. I'm not really going to talk about that right now. But yeah, the NA expansion tournament. I was really surprised. Well, not really surprised, but I was genuinely surprised how dominant the winning teams played in the second online round. I was really surprised that both complexity teams went flaming out of the tournament, and every series and round two was a 2-0, and not only were they 2-0s, but most of them were 2-0 stomps. Like, I don't feel, looking back, that these games might in the moment might have felt closer than they actually were because they didn't. In retrospect, I rewatched the VODs. They did not seem close at all. Any of the any of the any of these individual series. I've maintained for quite a long time that I believe Curse Academy and Coast are the favorites for this tournament. The experience that they have on their teams is very, very helpful. That's not to say that the other teams don't have experience, because like Fusion clearly is a very experienced roster, but I just felt coming in, Curse Academy was so close to making it into the LCS and not even having to go through the expansion tournament, and that could do a lot for a team's motivation. And Coast, I mean, I just want to take a second and talk about Impaler because he is playing out of his mind, and it's so interesting because he looks like he's out for blood. He looks like he wants this more. At least on the Rift, it seems like he wants this more than a lot of other players in the expansion tournament. At least that's the way I. When you watch him play, that's the way he's playing right now. Like just leaving it all on the Rift, and I have a lot of respect for players that play like that, and it's been very impressive to watch him. I think that Curse Academy and Coast are the favorites. I was really surprised by Complexity White and Complexity Black's showing. I think that their fans have every right to be immensely disappointed with their performances. Um, I there isn't a lot to say about that. I mean, maybe the management difficulties that they've had with the team, having to separate their rosters and pick up a bunch of free agents to complete two rosters, giving the automatic qualifying spot to Prolly's team. I mean, there's a series of decisions that now, in retrospect, we can look back and try and scrutinize. But I mean, their performance in the tournament itself was uh, subpar, to put it lightly. It was disappointing, immensely disappointing. I think I just at least thought one of those teams would have made it a series, especially especially uh, Cole Black against Final Five. Like I don't think anybody expected Final Five to go out there and 2-0 Complexity Black, considering the amount of experience LCS experience Complexity Black had. I think that was very unexpected. Uh, I don't think anyone would have predicted that. Maybe predicted a Final Five victory, but I don't think a 2-0, fairly dominant 2-0 performance was in anybody's mind pre round two of the NA expansion tournament. Fusion, I said this before and I'll say it again. They're definitely the wild card of this tournament. They excuse me, pardon me a second. Sorry. They are definitely the wild card of this tournament. Uh, I mean, they were sort of, I don't want to say styling on enemy, but it was crazy to watch Mock Noon play his just crazy go 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 dive play style, and his ability to come back in a deficit, having been targeted in both games early, his ability to come back and perform was incredible. Now, he's getting most of the hype, but I feel like the real plaudits should be given to Nintendo and Nien. Nien had a ridiculously high KDA, was very well positioned. Granted, he got a lot of solo farm because they were focusing Machnoon so much, but you know, a player can get solo farm, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to take advantage of it, and he did. He was well positioned in every team fight. He only died one time. He seemed a little bit skittish in game one. He had a few more opportunities to go and get kills that he didn't necessarily take advantage of. But I mean, hats off to him. I know he was an ADC, and then obviously he was the top laner for CLG, and then moving back. I mean, that's a lot of positional swaps to take in less than a year, basically. So hats off. He performed very well. But Nintendo, for me, was the MVP of that series. He set up so many fights. He knew exactly where to be. He had excellent map pressure, his vision control. I mean, there isn't enough good things to say about his performance against enemy. And it'll be interesting to see if he will carry that carry that strength into the offline portion of the tournament. Now, that's the question I have about all four of these teams, is which one is going to be able to overcome the land jitters that are inevitable when you play an offline tournament. Now, players can always say, like, that, that's not going to be an issue for me. Like, I've played, many of these teams have extensive LCS experience in aggregate, but this is a different animal. This is different from playing in a regular season LCS game where you could argue the game is rather meaningless if it's in the middle of the season or the beginning of the season because the LCS is there's so many games. This is do or die. This is get into the LCS and have a job and have a career in eSports, in League of Legends eSports, or either disbanding or having to play in the Challenger Series for a year. It's going to be crucial for any of these teams to find success in this tournament, in this portion of the tournament, to not let the live atmosphere overcome their ability to play cohesively and with clear strategy. And I think the team that is least affected by these aspects of these games is going to be the team that comes out on top, or the teams that come out on top. I'm excited. I'm really excited. I just wish it wasn't as far away as it actually is. It kind of sucks that we have to wait a couple more weeks. At least we have IEM San Jose next weekend, although I will be at a wedding. I was actually planning on going to IEM San Jose, or at least attempting to go, so I could cover it live. Obviously, that's not happening. I will not be able to do that. Family wedding, have to do it. Wouldn't miss it for the world. But I'll have to check out the VODs because I'm really intrigued to see the teams competing in there. It'll be our first taste of the competitive play with the new Summoner's Rift, so I'm really excited to see how that plays out. Two big pieces of news came out last week. One with regard to the LCS their official rules for the recognition of head coaches, and the second, the revision of their Permaban policy. Now, I'm going to start with the LCS coach aspect of things. I find this to be very interesting. They had announced, I think back in September or October, that this was their plan, that they were going to officially recognize LCS head coaches in the LCS. Going over the rules, at least the announced rules, because like I said, I wrote an article about this, and I stated in that, and I don't believe that any of the language used, maybe some of it will be, but the language in this doesn't seem to be final. This doesn't seem like this is what's going to be implemented into the LCS rules, like verbatim. It'll be interesting to see what the final version of the rule is, because it's hard to talk about a system of rules without understanding what the final language will be, because you can't necessarily interpret it unless you know what the final language will be. However, there are some implications from these changes that we could easily talk about. The first is the pick ban phase. Head coaches will now be allowed to participate fully and communicate with their teams during the pick ban phase. Now, I have no qualms with this whatsoever. I think this is a long overdue move. We've already seen this in OGN Masters, although it's not Champions, it's a tournament. It's a little bit different, had sort of a weirder format with the sister teams. But I said this in my article, I think that excluding head coaches from the pick ban phase would be like not allowing, let me put it this way, traditional sports, their coaches are in constant communication, more or less, with their players. And the pick ban phase is such a strategically imperative portion of League of Legends that it didn't make sense to not include the coach in that aspect of the game. And I don't believe the argument that, like, pick ban phases are going to be perfect and there's going to be no mistakes. And half the fun of pick ban is watching teams make mistakes and react to unexpected picks and unexpected bans and unexpected team compositions. But that's just incredulous. That defies belief that coaches would be somehow infallible in making picks and bans. That's just... They're going to make just as many mistakes as the players are. It's just going to be an extra set of eyes and an extra set of ears and an extra mind that's going to be involved in that process, who might actually have the executive decision making power vested in them to determine what the final team composition, the final picks and bans are going to be. They're going to make as many mistakes as the players do have in the past. They're going to be as successful or their success and failure of the pick ban phase. Now the responsibility is going to be more on the coach, and we're not going to be able to hear that tired excuse of, oh, my players, they didn't listen to my pick ban phase. They didn't follow the strategy I laid out in front of them. That's not an excuse anymore because they are involved in the process. Or at least the teams that do have coaches will be involved in the process. And the teams that don't have coaches, another aspect of this is they will be given a stipend by Riot in order to go out and hire the staff necessary, which has been proven necessary, I believe, at this point, to be a competitively viable team in League of Legends. Now, with any other sport, and just like League of Legends is going to be, it's going to be like any other sport. There's going to be great coaches, there's going to be mediocre coaches, and there's going to be complete shit coaches. Now, I think that this giving teams money in the short term, yes, you are going to see more bad coaches than good coaches. But in the long term, having given the opportunity for more people to be included in the process of coaching an LCS team, you're going to have you're going to have a larger pool of people to choose from to be your coach, and B, the more people that get experience, the more we can build in the West an infrastructure of coaching that can finally get off its back and start to not resemble, because Korea is 15 years ahead of us in terms of esports, but at least get on the path towards creating competent esports coaches in League of Legends. And like I said, there's going to be good coaches, and there's going to be bad coaches, and there's going to be mediocre coaches. But it's better to have more coaches or more people be given the opportunity to coach than not giving, than having very select few teams that have the privilege to be able to hire somebody to do this for them. The one aspect of this rule that I didn't necessarily pay close attention to when I first read it, but going back, and I pointed this out in my article, and this is the problem, this is the biggest thing I had an issue with, was the physical presence, or in person, whatever you want to call it, basically saying that the coach has to attend all of their team's games in person. This is very problematic for me because A, remote coaching in League of Legends are so synonymous with one another. There's been a proliferation of remote coaches. The global nature of this game sort of encourages remote coaching, because you might want a coach who lives in a different region and understands that different region's strategies and picks and bans, and is able to watch that region's solo queue, or is able to watch the scrims of the teams in that region. There's my sincere hope is that if this requirement is not removed, that Riot considers very strongly implementing an appeals or petition system for remote coaches to petition to not have to be present at all of their team's games and to still be able to participate in the pick ban process. And I'm saying this completely ignoring technical issues. I understand that there are logistical and technical issues that would be involved in having a remote coach communicate with their players on the pick bans. Putting that aside for now, I think that there's too much of a history of remote coaching, and there are too many remote coaches to just be to make a full-blown rule change that's saying all head coaches have to be physically present. I think it's too much. I think it's too high of a standard to expect too quick a change to expect these teams to make. It's going to force certain teams to probably hire substandard coaches who can be physically present, as opposed to hiring a quality coach who can't be physically present. I sincerely hope there's a petition system in the works, but my experience with having read the LCS rulebook several times and knowing that there's no appeal system for LCS rule violations. So expecting there to be a petition system for this is it might be wishful thinking on my part, but I hope it's at least talked about. I hope it's at least considered, because I think that expecting teams to make this sacrifice, to sacrifice someone who could be a great coach just because they can't be physically present at their game, I think that's not a good reason to not have that person be their coach. That's just my perspective on this issue. Like I said, I hope there's a petition system put in place in the event that this requirement is not completely done away with. Now, rolling into that sort of appeals petition LCS rule train of thought is the Permaban policy revision that Riot came out with on the 20th. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk recently about Incarnation potentially getting banned, and obviously after their revised competition ruling for Incarnation that they came out with the same rules they came on the previous ban policy, his suspension will be put under review 5 weeks before the summer split. And I think that Riot as a company has consistently talked about how reforming toxic players and reforming players who violate the Summoner's Code of Conduct is their priority over permanently banning them. And I think that this move it's a splendid move in my mind. I think it's the right move to just not permanently ban people, but to allow them to attempt to reform themselves before completely removing them from the scene more or less. Now, obviously, there are certain things that deserve permanent bans, and there's an argument to be made that certain players have performed those actions, but on the other hand, this is such a difficult thing to talk about, in my opinion, because God, I don't even really know how to articulate it. I'm glad they made the change that they categorized different bans into indefinite and fixed, and that they've revised their permanent ban policy, because people can change. People can honestly change the way they act, the way they treat other people, and giving these players the opportunity to change themselves for the better is a good thing in my mind. It shows a willingness for reconciliation that I think is very important. And it also shows that Riot is more willing. I don't know if this is a precursor to an appeal system for LCS rule violations, but at least they're not just out of hand ignoring any of the grievances of a player or manager or coach who may have been punished, but may have a reason. This is, like I said, this is very difficult for me to articulate. I think it's a smart move, and I hope this is a precursor to an appeal system for LCS rules violations, because I've always been uncomfortable with the idea of having a punitory system that doesn't allow for people to appeal their punishments. As someone who's studied law for the last 4 years, that makes me very uncomfortable, whether it be a statute, whether it be in sports, whether it be whatever. It's always made me uneasy when there's a system of punishment in place that doesn't allow for people to appeal those punishments. And I think that this is something I've clamored for in the past. This is something I've written about in the past. I think if the NFL's terrible player conduct policy has a portion in it for appeals and has a system of appeals, then I think that the LCS needs a system of appeals. And that's basically what it comes down to. Every traditional sport has an appeal system for player conduct violations. The LCS doesn't. It's never made any sense to me. And I hope that this is something that's changing in the future, and hope maybe that the Permaban policy revision is a precursor to that. Like I said, this could just be wishful thinking on my part. Who knows? That's just my hope. And that's just me because I'm a rules nerd, and this is the type of stuff I like to talk about and write about, obviously. Well, that's pretty much all I've got for tonight, guys. I'm not sure that my stream has been very strong tonight. It might be a little choppy. Regardless, if you aren't able to watch the stream of this, I will post a VOD on YouTube as soon as I can. Yeah. Sorry if I seemed a little bit flustered or unable to articulate myself. Like I said, in past episodes, I'm getting used to this. This is only the third episode I've done. Expect an article this week, contingent upon certain news being released, and hopefully I'll have an interview coming up in the future. I am just waiting to hear back from certain team managers about setting up interviews with their players. So this is a wrap on League of Musings episode 3. I hope you visit my website, read my stories, follow me on Twitter. Good night.